Today we're going to view a home that we have filmed previously from the point of severe deterioration to now the point of renovation. Jim LaRue from House Menders Incorporated has guided us through step by step what needed to be done at a property that was previously before Cleveland Housing Court. The owner decided to sell the property because they could not maintain it. Jim outlined from the foundation to the roof what things needed to be done on this home. And I'm pleased to present to you today a finished copy of the exterior of a historic home in an important Cleveland neighborhood. When the McLeans built this home in the 1880s, they built it to last. When it arrived in Cleveland Housing Court in 1996, it was close to being condemned and made into a vacant lot. However, because a family came in, private individuals who became owner-occupants, they have transformed this house. And it's a lesson for all of us in the city of Cleveland, and particularly for those people who are on our docket at the Cleveland Housing Court, about the scope of renovation that was needed and what things you need to know before you undertake renovation of a property and what to expect when it's finished. So I'm pleased to present the home on Scranton Avenue. Previously, this home was in Cleveland Housing Court, where the previous owner finally realized that he couldn't take the time or afford to bring this home back into order. It was severely deteriorated, not from just a year of deferred maintenance, but many years of deferred maintenance. In fact, some of the items hadn't been taken care of for over 50 years. We're here today with Jim LaRue from House Menders and the homeowner, Michael Beck, to take a look at the progress and talk about what it took to bring this home back. Michael, what a dramatic improvement on this home. I know when you first undertook this, you seemed pretty positive. Are you as positive now about the work that it took and the direction the house is taking?
It's been a lot of hard work, but yeah, we've all kept our chins up and done a lot of great work with a lot of great people helping out. It's a dramatic difference.
Well, you know, Michael, when you moved into this area a little more than a year ago, you just were attracted by the house, the possibilities of the house, but more than the house, you've become connected to this neighborhood. And you've been working with the neighborhood association and with your neighbors. And how has that experience been?
The neighborhood is great. Some people my age have moved in down the street and everybody's taken a big interest. Everybody's helped out a lot and everybody's keeping up their properties, and they're proud to have everybody take an interest in their neighborhood coming back to life here.
In fact, you're part of a group to make this a landmark district now to try to preserve the quality of housing stock that's here.
Yes, we're trying to keep everything into its historical integrity.
And so, Jim, part of coming in to do a house not only involves a house, but interacting with the neighborhood and the neighbors who are here in developing a neighborhood around that house in order to not only redevelop the individual property, but the place that it is located in.
Every rehab is a community building step, as far as I'm concerned. Years ago when I first started rehabbing, the first thing I would do is get to meet everybody on the street to let them know what I was doing with the house. And pretty soon we'd have people coming to see what we were doing in our rehab, and it's a community process. And sometimes I'm sure that you had occasion when you needed a neighbor or two to help hold something up or prop something up.
Everybody's helped out.
And that's a part of the community building process too.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm excited to go and look at this house because, of course, last year we took a look at what was wrong with this house and what needed to be done. So let's look at what has been done and perhaps find out how difficult it was to do.
Yeah, I want to find out about some of the surprises that I'm sure came down the pike.
Okay. Jim, the first thing that you said this house needed was a new roof, and that's where you
Certainly
started.
did, yeah.
It did. And it would have been quite an undertaking, and you explained the importance of a roof, and now there's a new roof here.
Yeah.
So anything you want to tell us about this roof? It's an unusual roof as far as new roofs go.
Yeah, well, what would have been great is if they could have kept the slate, but it was too deteriorated and it had to be removed. And instead of just putting a conventional asphalt shingle roof up, Mike did a little research and he came up with a simulated slate roof, which is actually asphalt. And a number of the companies now manufacture these simulated roofs, and we're beginning to see them around Cleveland. And they're really terrific because it maintains the character of the house, but at a dramatically reduced cost to replacing the slate. Replacing the slate would have been practically impossible.
Now this roof had a slate roof, and then on top of it was rolled roofing, and some of it coming up in places. And so this required a complete tear-off.
Yeah, that's what destroyed the slate. Once the roll roofing was up, it had so destroyed the slate that there was no other course but to remove it. The good news was that the sheathing underneath was tight enough that they didn't have to put new plywood sheathing down on top of the other sheathing, which reduced the cost. And so they've got a new roof. And I also noticed that they repointed the chimney and put new flashings around the chimney. And the flashings appear to have been put into the mortar joint, so you have a good, effective water control.
In fact, that's one of the things that you recommend. Some people put the flashing and just caulk it, seal it against the chimney without incising it into the brick. And you recommend that they put it into the brick, and that's how you can tell whether you have a good flashing job or not.
Exactly. It's the counter flashing. There's a base flashing that's under the shingle and then up onto the chimney, and then there's a counter flashing that goes down on top of that. And if that's not put into the brick, what happens over time is the metal expands and contracts with the heat and cold, and it pops the seal, and then moisture drains down the chimney, and you get these penetrating leaks that are such a pain because there's a bit of plaster damage and other things. Plus it creates some moisture damage to the chimney itself. So it takes a little more time, but most roofing companies now recognize that it's what you need to do.
Mike, how did you become so knowledgeable about the type of roof to put on? You put a great roof on there, and the work is excellent.
Asking a lot of questions, again, just gathering as much information as I can before we started the project. Our roofer came highly recommended, and we sorted through all kinds of old house journals, looking at the different options, and mimicking the slate roof was the way I wanted to go.
And so you looked at a number of the new roofs around Cleveland and sort of designed which type you wanted, and then found someone that could do that type, but also required a quality job up there as well.
Right.
And so it was a complete tear-off, and that's a steep roof.
Yes.
So, but it took a while to get it up there, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Your contractor disappeared for a while, but
Yes.
I know through your and other people's detective skills, you were able to find him again and get the roof on.
Yes, we did get it finished. And we were lucky with the weather we had last year that it wasn't snowing or raining, and very lucky. I'm happy.
So there was a tense month or two when you were in a house without a roof.
Very tense.
Well, we're going to look at some of the other elements of the house, and we're going to start, I think, with the porch, Jim. And you can see that last year, we can go over there now. Last year, we looked at this area, and this was deteriorated. Dry rot or rot wicked up through this post, and these posts would be very hard to duplicate. So you're able to save all of these, isn't that right?
Yes.
And what did you do here? That and it's sealed, so this is sealed against water. You can just feel that it's not going to penetrate in there.
We used a wood filler, like a Bondo, and it was a powder material. We mixed it up and we got it up in there. We made sure that everything was fine first before we did that. And yeah, just a little bit was rotted away from, like you were saying in the other show, that the water was just running underneath and going up. So we chipped away the bad stuff and then filled it in.
Okay.
The new wood filler products they have available now are so strong, you could literally, if this was totally rotted at the bottom, you could jack this up, fill in with that new material, and it would actually support the load. That's the uniqueness of some of the new wood filler products. So you don't have to replace posts because it has that kind of strength.
Now, we had talked about $2.50 tube of caulk could save thousands of dollars worth of damage.
So around here.
So, and it looks like this was all caulked
it's
here
all caulked now.
and then painted.
Yeah.
So when that water, when it penetrates, it won't penetrate,
Exactly.
and it'll just roll right off of there.
Yeah. And if there are hollow posts, as there are on some homes, some of the large rounder posts, if that water leaks in from the top, it can get down inside the post. So if you correct the leakage at the top and you keep that water from getting in the inside, then you've protected the post also.
Okay. Now, on this area, we saw quite a bit of water damage even going down the side of the house.
Yeah.
Let's go over there and take a look at that. It's nice to see the after picture of how the gutters were treated and painting. And Michael, we want to talk to you about the actual painting of the house, the colors, the type of paint you used, and that type of thing. So let's go over there and take a look.
Okay.
Mike, this was an area that had a great deal of water damage. What did you do on this section? Because I see that you've put new siding on here, and it appears like you've been able to stop the water damage.
The gutters helped out tremendously. We replaced a lot of the wood. I just had to take everything completely apart here. The whole window, all the siding came off, and then we had to just rebuild it from scratch pretty much.
Because that water for years was going down here. I know that some of your neighbors, of course, commenting on the neglect, said that there hadn't been curtains in this house in 30 years, and there hadn't been control of the water for that probably as long a period of time, and that does a lot of damage. But it looked like you fixed it, so it's by getting that water under control. Is that right?
Yes. Everything came completely apart. We fixed all this, and now what we need to do is we're going to take our storm drains, and they were all going into the basement, and now we're going to dig up all the foundation, and we're going to waterproof that now, and we're going to run our storm drains right into the storm sewer versus by way of the basement now.
What do you think of that, Jim?
Yeah, it was very common in houses this old that the storm drains would go down and then run under the floor to a common drain that would run to the front. Anytime you can get storm water out of your basement, you want to do that. For people who can't afford that kind of excavation, if you can run the water on the surface like to a driveway so it can get away from the house, that can be effective as well. About 85% of the water that ends up in our basements comes from defective storm downspouts.
85% of the water.
85% of the water. That's running water. Wall damp, of course, can come from the surface water, but getting that water away is a good idea, and if you can afford to put it into a new storm drain that goes to the street, that would certainly, of course, be the most effective.
Well, that's an expensive,
very expensive
way to solve the problem. So if you have a drain out onto your driveway, you have to be careful it doesn't go on your neighbor's property, because then you run into problems with the city and your neighbor, a dual set of problems. And so if you have it running off into the driveway or an area, it just has to make sure that that water doesn't go on your neighbor's property. And
the caulk again, I noticed they've caulked the joints along here and along here. That simple act, wherever you have an end grain hitting another surface, is one way of reducing the moisture damage. Again, simple caulking can dramatically reduce the cost of long-term maintenance.
So this whole area was caulked here all the way down and then painted over and primed. Mike, you took all the paint off this house and then you primed it? Is that right? What type of primer did you use?
We used an oil-based primer. We had it tinted to 70% of the color.
Oh, I see. So then it wasn't the prime coat that went on was tinted, and then the final coat wasn't going to be as dramatic a difference, so you wouldn't have to do two coats, let's say, right?
Yeah, it saved us time down the road.
Now, Jim, do you recommend the oil primer over the latex primer?
Currently, the paint companies are saying, and the Forest Products Lab in Madison, Wisconsin says an oil-based primer and then 2 coats of finish paint are the most effective way to get a long-term life out of a paint job.
So this is oil-based primer and one coat of finish paint.
Yes.
And then next year you're going to put another coat on?
We're going to keep painting.
If you've got paint, you will keep painting.
All right.
Can you tell me where you got information about your colors and the choice of colors? Where did you get that kind of information?
We contacted the Cleveland Restoration Society. They were very helpful, and their information was all free. They mailed us pamphlets and came out and actually talked to us.
That's
Now, was this
terrific.
the original color of the house, or
No, we altered the colors some.
what was the original color?
It was a green and red
Oh, I see.
Green and red. So the base was green with the red trim?
with red trim.
Uh-huh. Now, one thing comment I might make about that is a dark green color, you're more likely to get even more paint peeling because the sun is absorbed by that dark color. The lighter color gives you more reflection and reduces the amount of paint peeling. So going with a lighter color also will help you keep that paint on for a little longer time.
That's good.
Well, that's good. An added benefit you didn't know about. Well, this was quite a job to paint this house and to polychrome it, which means putting on many different colors. But you've accomplished it, and how long did it take to paint this house?
It took 10 weeks of scraping, or 5 weeks of scraping and 5 weeks to paint.
And 5 weeks to paint. And then, of course, at various times it may have been raining, so you had to wait, what, 2 days for the house to dry?
Yes. When it was raining, everybody moved on a porch.
Uh-huh.
We say the porch for last. That's a good
Okay.
trick we learned.
Yeah.
And when it rained, yeah, you're supposed to let it dry out for a couple of days, and then we washed the house down and then let it dry, and then we painted.
That's important. You did clean it down. There's so much traffic in the city, and there's so much dust that gets generated from manufacturing. Even in a few days after you've cleaned, you can have dust again. So you were probably continually cleaning as you were getting ready to paint as well.
Yeah, so we were running a dust brush over it
Yep.
and just dusting it off. And
Painting over dust can make a terrible job out of all this work because you're only painting onto the dust, and it won't be long before the paint peels.
Just
So
peels
taking
right
time
off.
to clean really is important.
Now, this is a latex final coat? Is
Yes.
that, yeah, so that's a latex final coat. So, Jim, how long do you think this job will last?
Well, having gone down to the base and applied a good primer, I would still recommend probably going with a second coat sometime over the next year or two. They are telling us at Forest Products Laboratory out of Madison, Wisconsin, that you can expect to get a number of years, 7, 8, 10, 12 years out of a paint job. Now, that's related also to interior moisture. And if there is a bathroom someplace or a
Dryer vented out,
is not venting properly, you can end up with certain spots where you end up with moisture problems. But generally, having gone to all this trouble, they should get a number of years of life out of this paint job.
So, and you could help save that by reducing the moisture in your house, because that moisture is fighting to get outside, and
That's
so
right.
it pushes the paint off to
Exactly.
get outside. So the bathroom vents,
Yep.
the dryers should be vented outside, and
Right.
so many people want to vent them inside in the winter. But
And these old homes usually only had windows in bathrooms that were not fans.
yes.
And I expect that you'll probably be considering installing fans in your bath and
Exhaust
kitchen.
fans.
Exhaust fans, and that will help reduce the moisture load.
This foundation on this home was really a magnificent, well-made foundation. Huge sandstone blocks were used on this, and you can see that they were hand-tooled at the quarry, but it had deteriorated as far as their mortar joints quite a bit. And what this needed was tuck pointing throughout, and it looks like the whole house has been tuck point, all the mortar joints. Mike, could you explain what was needed here and what you actually did to tuck point this?
we had to grind all the old mortar out of here. We went back about 4 inches. Water blasted all the fine material and everything out of there, and then soaked it down, mixed up the mortar, and then we put the mortar in there and with baker bags. Struck it out and then took a paintbrush over it. We used a Type M rich mortar on it, which is required for the old sandstone.
Okay, so it was a special type of mortar. And Jim, you had outlined, and this was something prior to being at this house, when we did the first video, that I wasn't aware of. And there are many people, in fact, we've had 1,000 people come before the housing court who have had to tuck point their foundations. And I didn't know that the type of mortar made a difference.
It makes a lot of difference, Ray. Well, number one, color. You want to match mortar as much as you possibly can color-wise. The second thing is the texture of the mortar and the character. And then third, the strength of the mortar. And the strength is really the most critical. You can notice what's happened to the surface of this sandstone over the years is that there was no mortar in this joint, and the water would drain down the face and then wick under here, and then it would wick up into the face of here, and then with the freeze-thaw cycles that we get in our winters, it would just keep spalling little bits and pieces of this off over a long period of time, and it probably most effectively illustrates why a proper mortar joint is so important, because now water can come down and drain off of here and it's not sucked back in. But if you have the wrong strength of mortar, that can be a problem in itself, because that mortar gets a bit of moisture in it and it expands and contracts, and it's stronger than, if the mortar is stronger than the stone, it will cause some spalling in the stone. So the mortar always should be slightly weaker than the stone, and that's why you tend to have rather sandy mortars in these old homes, because it needs to be able, better to have a little bit of this joint spalling than having it hard and cracking away the surface of the wall.
Well, Jim, how would you even be able to detect the amount of sand in your mortar? You have to take it someplace to have it tested?
Sometimes the masonry supply yards and some of the building supply yards that have masonry supplies, if you take a chunk of the mortar, they can give you some idea about what you need to do in order to create a mortar for that purpose. So generally, with an older home like this, as was the case for Mike, he was able to find a mason who's familiar with working with old buildings, and I think that that probably is the best way to go with this, is you have someone who's familiar with mixing the mortars and making appropriate application.
Well, I've seen some defendants in the court, rather than putting all the mortar in these joints and tuck pointing this, they said, well, look, I'm just going to cover the whole thing, parge it with cement and mortar. And so probably for the first 6 months to a year, you know, they have it all covered, no deterioration, and but then they start to see places popping off. Can you talk a little bit about, and tell us a little bit about the parging process and, you know, using that mortar on that type of thing?
You have to be very careful about parging surfaces like this. Again, it's really critical that you use a material that's compatible with the stone that you're covering. So if you're putting a parge, which again is stronger than or harder than the stone, like the sandstone, there's a good chance that if any moisture wicks through that material and it freezes, that you're going to get that popping off, and when it pops off, it's going to take some of the stone with it as well.
And, so or some of the brick. I've seen the brick just come right off.
Right.
And
but it happens on the inside of basements too. It's why I normally don't recommend using any kind of cementitious coating on the inside of basements, because you get outside moisture that comes through the wall, and then the salts that are in that build up behind it and pop it off. So on the inside, it's a salt buildup. On the outside, it's just the normal freeze-thaw cycle. And now if you put some kind of a sealer on that, it might help a bit, but then you have to be careful that you're not trapping moisture on the inside so it can't dry to the outside. So it's generally a risky thing to be applying those kind of coatings to the outside.
well,
Unless it's, say, a concrete block wall, which will take that kind of stuff. But when you're into
but
this
brick
kind of
or
stone,
sandstone, it just shouldn't be
I think
covered
it's not
with
a
that
good
mortar.
idea.
Now I know when you were with the Housing Resource Center, one of the things on the interior, you said don't seal up the inside.
Yeah.
You could paint it with a latex paint.
Yeah.
Is that still the...
I generally feel that's still the case, though there are people who would completely disagree. There are some masonry paints you can get. Most things are not going to keep water from coming through a wall. And the major problem is not the water anyway. It's with interior coatings. It's the salts that are in the water that come through the wall. That's the stuff that creates that white powder, that fluorescence. When that builds up behind a coating, it'll pop whole sections of that stuff off, and that stuff does bond well to the masonry surface, and when it does, it pulls chunks. And I've been in basements that looks like a shotgun was fired at the wall because that stuff is starting to pop off.
Well, I've been in some basements where there was a shotgun fired at the wall. So, but that's one way to help preserve your foundation,
Yeah.
which your house is sitting on. And this, of course, this foundation, you had remarked the last time on how well made it was.
It's just enormous. It's a huge wall. And what I like about what they did is that they really cut back into the mortar joint so that what they applied is really providing some necessary protection. Now, generally, pointing doesn't add strength to the wall. It adds protection to the wall. You'd have to practically rebuild the wall to get full protection.
To get
from
that
mortar.
strength.
Right, yeah.
Okay. How long do you think that this type of tuck pointing will last?
Should last a long, long time.
Okay.
Should not need to worry about that. Although you're still going to want to keep an eye on the surfaces of the sandstone and make sure that it is not spalling at some critical points, but it should last a long time.
So do you think any type of sealer on here, or just let it breathe?
I think it would let it breathe.
Uh-huh.
And what you might want to consider at some time are some of the cleaners you can now get. But it's very important to, if you're going to use a cleaner on the outside of this, to get stuff that really is effective. There are a couple of companies in Cleveland that sell cleaning products for exterior surfaces like this, and you can get them. Don't use just anything on it. Be sure you get something that's compatible with this. Again, Old House Journal will have articles about that. There's another magazine called Traditional Building that has articles about that, and you can get some good information. And also they have ads for the companies that supply these materials to clean it.
I see. Well, you know, Mike, you stepped in. This house was in a critical state. Wouldn't you say that, Jim?
Yeah, I think that structurally it was still had a lot going for it, but it wasn't going to be long before even that was going to be subject to failure if you didn't get to it soon.
Well, there was years of deferred maintenance on this house, and it came to the housing court's attention because the previous owner came into court with a number of violations. And so he realized that he just couldn't handle it, and so he sold it, and you were the buyer, and I think the neighborhood's lucky that you came in, because you have not only worked to renovate the house, you've worked to save it, and you've put on the roof, and you've painted it, and you've tuck pointed it, all in the right fashion. Is that right, Jim?
Yeah, and he's raised the value of not only this house, but of the whole neighborhood by a significant dollar amount. When you do this amount of work, and you encourage that kind of work in other houses in the neighborhood, you've significantly increased the property value on that street.
So this house is the talk of the neighborhood, but very positive talk, and people are talking about this house and using this as an example to plan projects on their own home. And so what you did here and all of the work that you put in here is now being replicated down the street. And so I think that that's something that's significant and really beyond value. It helps create a sense of neighborhood, and you were able to do that with one house, and it expands out from there. So that's great, and congratulations, and I'm pleased to see this. And you've pulled permits for all of this work, so I'm not going to see you in housing court, so I had to come out here to take a look at it.
That's good.